Started. Welcome everybody. We had a little technical difficulties, so you'll have to pardon us. We're having some computer fruit basket turnover, but welcome to the private well and on-site wastewater systems basics. We have quite a lot of information to share tonight. My name is Dr. Laura Chu, and I am the County Extension Director here and the Marine Science Agent. And I'm here with Dr. Andrea Albertin, who is our Northwest District water specialist, who really has been doing a series of these workshops all around the Panhandle. And then we also have Dr. Jason Barrett from Mississippi State University, who's going to be joining us as well. So we've got a lot of information to share tonight, so we'll go ahead and get started. First, we wanted to kind of go over the why of actually why we think this program is important. From what we know, the data shows us that there's about 12% of Florida residents that have private wells at their home for their own water consumption. But the private wells are not regulated. In fact, you're responsible for ensuring the safety of that water. And 30% of the households in Florida rely on septic systems for wastewater management. And as we know, a septic system that's not properly functioning can be a source of nitrogen pollution and get into the groundwater and actually be a source of pathogens if you're not careful. We happen to get at our office, we have a lot of contact with the public, and we get so many calls about people who move here from other areas who aren't familiar with well systems and septic systems. They've been on city water or city sewer, so that's why we decided to have this workshop. So it seems like you're kind of out on your own because it is your responsibility, but there is a lot of help out there. You have to protect your well, but there's places you can go for help. And the first place you can go is the Department of Health. They do provide information and testing for all well users. We also have our Northwest Water Management District. We have an office here in Defuniak, and they do all the permitting for any new wells that are going in. And then we actually have also through the Department of Health is a well surveillance program that if there are some suspected contaminants being released around, they can help take care of that. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrea. You've heard about the why we're having the workshop. She's going to get a little bit more specific about Walton County in particular.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Laura. I appreciate everyone being on. As Laura mentioned, my name is Andrea Albertin, and I'm the Regional Water Resources Extension Agent here in the Florida Panhandle. And I'm just going to go over a little bit of well information and septic information in Walton County, and also where your water comes from for those of you that are well users. And then Jason will go ahead and talk about private wells in particular and septic systems. Then at the end, we'll get back together and I'll talk a little bit about disaster preparedness. So here in Walton County, this is a map that shows public water land parcels in the top left in blue. So about 41% of the county is known to be on public water supply. If you look on the one on the right in purple, you can see that there are about 6% of land parcels that are known to be on private wells, 0.5% that are likely to be on private wells, but we think that number is actually much higher. This is an inventory that's done by the Department of Health, and you can see in the lower left-hand corner that there just isn't a lot of data on 50% of the well parcels and the land parcels, and they also tend to be in the northern part of the county. So even though there's only known about 6% that are on wells, the number of private wells are actually suspected to be much higher. And in terms of septic systems, this is again, Florida Water Management Inventory land parcels, septic systems and sewer parcels. So in the top left, what we're showing here on this map is how many land parcels have wastewater treatment done through the public system. And so about 34%, largely in the cities and very much on the coast, are on public wastewater treatment systems, whereas about 38% are actually septic system parcels. And you can see that, yes, they're concentrated in the north, but we also have a lot of septic systems down by the coast. And these are ones that have a lot of problems if there isn't enough water table separation between the drainage field and the water table, and with rising sea levels, climate change, et cetera. Those are ones that are causing problems, and Walton County is looking to get a lot more people on septic systems onto sewer. So here in Walton County and in most of Florida, we are lucky enough, fortunate enough to have the Floridan aquifer system supply a large part of our water supply, both public supply and private supply. So the Floridan aquifer, this map shows sort of the extension of the Floridan aquifer here. It's one of the most productive aquifers in the world, and it covers approximately 100,000 square miles in the eastern United States. So not only the Florida, but it extends all the way into South Carolina to our north through Georgia, and on to the west, it extends all the way to Alabama. And here in Florida, it actually supplies water to about 11 million people. So about half of our population gets their well water from the Floridan aquifer. This is a limestone aquifer, a lot of hard water, that calcium carbonate deposit. So even though about half of Floridians get their water from this, there are portions of the aquifer that are too deep to access. Western Panhandle, the Floridan aquifer is actually very, very deep, and the water there is saline. So people in Okaloosa, Santa Rosa, and Escambia County actually get most of their water from a system, a surficial aquifer system that lies on top of the Floridan, which is the sand and gravel aquifer. But here in Walton County, most of your water, if you're tapped into a private well, comes from the Floridan aquifer. And I wanted to show you another map that I think highlights this a little bit better. This was it's one that shows commonly used aquifers in certain areas. And the yellow, the two colors of yellow, are areas that tap directly into the Floridan aquifer system, that limestone aquifer for most of the water supply. And you can see, if you look up here at the top of the map, that Walton County, the majority of Walton County, the aquifer that you're tapping into with your private wells is the Floridan. As soon as we head over into Okaloosa, Santa Rosa, and Escambia, as I mentioned before, the Floridan is so deep that people are using the sand and gravel on top of it. And why is this important? Simply because depending on where you're drawing your water from, your water chemistry is very different. The Floridan aquifer, as I mentioned before, is calcium carbonate. It's limestone, hard water, a lot of calcium and magnesium deposits. The pH is quite high, so it's not acidic at all. Whereas people that are on the sand and gravel aquifer, the water chemistry is just very, very different. It's a lot more acidic water, it's soft water, and you don't tend to have those deposits. So just to give you an idea of different aquifers in the region and where you might be drawing your water from, depending on where you are. And since in Walton County, you do draw most of your water from the Floridan aquifer, I just wanted to show a diagram that depicts this a little bit better. And so this is a diagram out of the Floridan, and the blue bricks that you see there, that's a representation of a limestone aquifer. And so this is a picture of an exposed limestone along the Suwannee River, where you can see that limestone aquifer, it's quite porous. There's a lot of conduits. It's an aquifer system that's known to supply a lot of water, and it's recharged relatively easily as well. And here you can see that lying on top of the Floridan, that's what I was talking about, you have a surficial aquifer. In this case, it's a sand aquifer. And so if you have wells that are tapping deeper into the Floridan aquifer, which is the case in most of Walton County, you tend to have a very good water supply, that hard water supply. And shallower wells, surficial wells that might be, a lot of people here actually, if you're not quite deep enough, you might be tapping into a more surficial aquifer. And these have a lot more interaction with surface activity. So what I'm trying to show you here is, for example, a well that's drawing water from deeper into the aquifer, especially if you have a confining layer that separates that surficial sand aquifer from the Floridan aquifer, your water tends to be a little bit more protected in the sense that it doesn't have an immediate effect of activities that happen directly upon it. And those confining layers tend to be made up of of hard packed clays. So for example, water that would infiltrate through that sandy surficial aquifer layer hit that confining unit, that clay, and couldn't immediately go down into the floor and that's below that confining layer. It would have to find alternate ways, get to an area that does not have that clay layer to then recharge the aquifer. So I was speaking to a geologist last week that works in this area, and he did mention that in Walton County, the majority of the county does have a hard packed confining layer of clays, and that most of the wells there are drawn from a protected or the Floridan aquifer that has that confining unit above it. If you have a much shallower well, a superficial well in the sand, what I'm hoping you can tell by this image is that you just have a lot more direct connection to surface activities on land. And so your well water can be much more quickly impacted by activities that occur there, especially when we have hurricanes and we have flooding and things like that. Anyway, this was just a brief introduction to a little bit about wells and septic systems in Walton County and where your water comes from. And now I'm actually going to hand the presentation off to Dr. Jason Barrett, who is in Mississippi. And Jason, I'll stop sharing and let you get right into the topics of septic systems and private wells.
All right, thank y'all. Can y'all see? Well, I need to share my presentation, don't I? That
You
would help.
do, and I'll leave as soon as we know that we have you up there. Yeah. Perfect. We can see it from here, Jason.
Okay, so you can see private well basics, is that correct?
Not showing up on our screen.
Hold on 1 second.
You stop sharing?
Should I stop sharing?
Yeah. Did you stop sharing?
Oh, probably not. Thought I had, but
Tell me when you're ready to rock and roll.
yes.
We're good?
No, it's
No.
still up. Why is yours still showing up here?
I don't know. I thought I stopped sharing. Let me make sure it's not shared here.
This thing is crazy.
It says I'm sharing. I can stop if you need me to.
No, we can see you.
And I think it's happening on Zoom. It's just for the people here, Jason. The projector is still showing the previous presentation, but we're going to try to fix that.
I have. This one's. Tell you what we're gonna do. We're just gonna bring this one over to get started while we work on fixing that. Hold on. All right, Jason, you can go ahead and get started. We've got our laptops there and then I'll work on fixing this.
Okay. All right, well, I'll begin. So for those of y'all that can see me or at least see the presentation and hear me, I'm Jason Barrett here at Mississippi State University, the Water Resources Research Institute. Long-time friend of Dr. Albertin. We have known each other and worked together for a little while now, just states apart. So this was I'm gonna say a very welcome opportunity when we had a chance to just do some training and education together. What we've done in Mississippi, very similar to what Andrea was just showing y'all related to private wells and septic. Again, I'm gonna get into several of these topics, but just kind of teeing it up. Tonight, we're gonna talk about just some private well basics. Again, I'm gonna try to go through mainly some points about private wells, and I may reference Mississippi just because that's where we are, that's the work we do. And then we'll also get into some on-site wastewater system, septic, decentralized system basics with that as well. I will say this, and hopefully I will recall and say it at the end. If there's anything that you get out of the training that we're doing, what we're talking about here, in my professional opinion, from what I've seen, what I've done over the years, private wells and decentralized systems can be very good sources for your drinking water and or treatment of wastewater, as long as they are maintained properly and you pay attention and you're just conscious of the system and keep them up. So with that, we're going to talk about wells first, then we'll get into decentralized systems. All right, so just an outline here. I'm going to talk about population data. I know Andrea just showed y'all some population information about Florida. I'm going to show you what we've seen in Mississippi and how we came to that information. Then we'll talk about wells. I'm going to hit on publications and resources, mainly because with the Well Owner Network, which is a program across the country, we have tried our hardest when we have new states that are coming on that are wanting to do well programs and decentralized programs. We will pass along publications, and if they work for the state, you could just simply tweak them, shift them to fit your state. Typically not a lot has to change, because when it comes to wells, when it comes to septic, besides the location, not a lot changes. When we start thinking about the soil type, soil permeability, that may dictate the type of leach fields or system you may have, but the process is very similar. And I'm gonna also show you all some information that we've got related to what we're seeing about the wells and the people that we're finding that are actually on wells. And then I'll talk about abandoning. All right, so dealing with populations, one of the interesting things that I saw when we were trying to figure out where are the wells in Mississippi, very similar to many states, private wells just aren't regulated. It's not a regulated supply. Typically, most of your wells within your state agency that regulates wells, whether it's your primacy or another group, they're going to have a limit on the well casing size. In Mississippi, for instance, it's 6 inches. Anything less than 6 inches, you do not need a permit. It is requested that you use a licensed well driller, because if you use a licensed well driller, hopefully they are going to drill the well per well drilling specs. But nothing says you have to. That's one of the things we encourage. But anyway, knowing that information, it's not permitted, so nothing is on record really showing us where wells are located. So if you come into this blind trying to think where are the private well populations, one of the things that jumped out at me first was thinking about our state primacy agency is going to have data, which every state primacy agency is going to have data about people on public supplies. So if you start making that disconnect between your census data and public supply data, that should start giving you an idea of that gap should be your people that are on another source, potentially on private wells. Also, USGS did have some data that kind of lended to us finding our population. So I'm gonna go. So the first method here, I was simply looking at our census data and our state primacy. The problem is from there, I was finding a lot of discrepancies. I mean, I would have counties where I'd show more people on a public supply than even live in the county. So one thing we started doing is actually looking into the census data and drilling down to the county specific and looking at connections from our primacy with the county specific information from the census to determine the population on public supply. So that gave us a lot more of an accurate estimate on public supply. And then also utilizing the USGS numbers, we were accounting for about a 15% kind of commercial redundancy rate. So that really helped us hone in on what we see as our population. So this is a publication that I've done, I know twice. We're in probably the third revision now, where we're looking at populations based on just magnitude of numbers, also the percentage. But fairly, we've stayed in this 11% range. The last time we redid this in 19, I think it was maybe 11.7, 11.84. So we're seeing this same number hover around the 12% mark of our state's population. And I think I heard Laura, Andrea say the same thing where you are in Florida. But if we fast forward and we hit towards our on-site decentralized, we're more in the neighborhood of about 35% on septic or wastewater, on-site wastewater. So again, I'm gonna go back to that for a second. 12% in both states is still a very large population to be on typically a shallower water supply, potentially unconfined aquifers, not as good, I'm gonna say, wellhead protection that you may have from your public supply, zero treatment, also from a sampling and oversight is much less compared to our public supply. So we're looking at, when you think 10 to 15% of your population is drinking water from a source that's unregulated, no treatment, usually minimal maintenance as well. Okay, so what we saw when we started looking at Mississippi, we had a bulk of our counties, 63 of the 82 had some type of population. About 25 had less than 3,000, 26 had 3,000 to 10,000, and then we had 12 counties over 10,000. So if you see here, I did not pinpoint, mainly because I was looking at county specific data, but I'll build out why you're seeing these spots here. If you look in this northern part of the state up here, these three counties, this is just south of a major metro area, Memphis, Tennessee. Very busy town, very busy airport, very busy riverport, just a big town. So a lot of that population has kind of drifted down into Mississippi, and as much as I hate to say it, a lot of our public water supplies are not positioned financially or physically to expand and meet the needs of its residents moving in. So as a result, you see a massive amount of private wells popping up all over the place. I'm not a huge advocate for it. I'd much rather see the public water supplies be able to expand, but that's another discussion. When we get down here in the central, you see this Madison, Hines, Rankin, this area in here. This is our capital city area. It's actually in Hines County. And over the last 20 years, you've just seen people move out of the capital city and move into these surrounding small towns that are now popping up in a pretty big size. But very similar concept is what we saw in North. The sprawl happened quicker than any of our public water supplies could reach out and meet. Then going to South Mississippi here, which again is our closest connection to where you all are. And this is where the greatest population in the state is. In these lower 6 counties, this probably accounts for, almost half of our state's population resides in these lower 6 counties. This is just this heavily populated, very busy counties in the state. So you see, and we've even got county wide utility districts down there, a lot of public water supplies and a lot of private wells. It's pretty ridiculous to see so much overlap just to provide drinking water to the residents. And I'm sure in Florida, y'all probably have very similar scenarios where people may be moving out of some parts into your state and your public water supplies may not be able to meet. Also may see some of your larger capital cities or larger cities, people having that urban sprawl, not being able to catch up. So a quick answer to that is drilling at private wells. So we see that in plenty of the other states that we do work in, Texas, Virginia, Pennsylvania. We see these same scenarios playing out. I wanted to show y'all this mainly because when we started looking at this information about 10 years ago, we asked the U.S. Census folks, why did we take the question off the census dealing with private wells? And their answer at the time was because of the expansion of community water systems across the country. The assumption was as populations grow, they would simply go towards public supplies. So you'd see this private well number decreased. But you see here from 1990 to 2015, when we redid that publication, it was basically stagnant over a 25-year period. And I would say a lot of that's because we haven't seen the community systems expand as they needed to. And again, that's a whole nother topic. But realizing that we've somewhat hit this stagnation point, because again, the states that we've been working with over the last decade all are seeing very similar trends and not seeing much movement in people getting off of private wells and getting on to community system. And this only gets, I'm gonna say, heightened or exacerbated when we have large issues with public water supplies. I'm not sure if y'all had any issues in Florida that gained national attention, but we had one a couple of years ago. And if you dial it back, y'all may remember, Flint, Michigan, that was an issue. So you see these real heightened issues, and it just kind of plugs in that small level of kind of distrust that people may have with community water systems. So it doesn't surprise me that we've seen this kind of stagnation rolling on. All right, so when we start thinking about private wells, these are the typical questions when we go out and we go on site and we're working with systems and we start thinking about the safety and the well-being. So as y'all heard me on the front end, if there's anything you do, take away from this is my mindset of wells can be a very viable, good, and safe source for drinking water, but there are things you need to be aware of and try to take note of, and just I'm gonna say maybe from a maintenance standpoint, work towards the safety. So where is the well? And then you saw Andrea's map of y'all's Florida aquifer. There is typically a known groundwater flow. So what we if I had to make an educated guess, I'm gonna assume y'all's may move kind of from the northeast to the southwest. I know that's what I've seen a lot of in the southeastern. So in Mississippi, we see that from the northeast to the southwest. You kind of see that groundwater flow. So we typically like to place wells upstream or typically north of any type of potential contaminant source. So again, I would encourage y'all to maybe think about that if you haven't already drilled a well, or think about that if you haven't already put in a potential contaminant source. So as we've listed here, septic tanks, livestock pastures, fuel tanks of any sort, just being conscious of that. Runoff around the well, in a perfect world, in a perfect scenario, anytime there's groundwater flow, surface water flow around your well, it is flowing away from, not to. Flowing away from, off of. Sadly, sometimes we see wells just on slope sides, and then there's a depression around it. So what happens? Water pools and puddles. And this goes back to some of the wellhead discussions that I was talking about. Is there any type of wellhead protection of your well? Per design, and I'll get into it in just a second, you should have some type of concrete slab, some type of basin that's giving you a good well to ground seal, so that if any water does come around, it's going around it, not forming around your well casing, because that well casing, they're always going to be drilled at a larger diameter. The bore holes are always going to be drilled to a larger diameter than the well casing itself. And when they seal that, it's called an annular space. They typically seal it with bentonite clay, which is supposed to give you a good seal, and they should seal it at least 10 foot down. If there's a contaminant source around, they will potentially go to 50 foot. So there are some guidance on that to give you a good seal, but I would always go that step further based on design is having you some type of concrete slab. At a minimum, I would put a 4-inch concrete slab, 4 foot square. Some of these old wells, if any of y'all have been around, when some of these old public supply wells are abandoned, there is a huge wellhead protection. There's a huge concrete slab. I mean, it can be very thick. It can be several inches up to a couple of feet thick, and it can be, again, 4 foot wide. I mean, you can have an amazing seal up there. Also, and I know I've got some pictures here in a second when we think about holes or cracks in our well casing. This may be one of those items that leads to contamination when we're trying to figure out how is it getting in there. Also, height of your well casing. This is something to me that if you're in potential flood zones, knowing the level of the potential flood, sometimes people use that 100-year flood level to think about the height of the well casing. Just by general code, it should be at least a foot above. So I would encourage, especially if you're going to put a 4-inch slab and you want another foot above, make sure that you're going to have a 16-inch casing out of the ground. Sadly, that's not always the case. But I would encourage you to try to get your casing as high as you can. And if you are in flood zones, think about wherever that 100-year flood level is, potentially getting your casing higher. Because we have seen, and we've done studies to where we find that if they are flooded, inundated with either rainwater, hurricane, something, we do see an increase in total coliform E. coli presence in those wells when they've been inundated by water. So in a perfect world, we'd get them higher than that flood stage. All right. How old is a well? This is one of those questions that we ask homeowners all the time when we do sampling. But I would say I have seen wells that are 6 months old come back with bacteria, and I've seen wells where people say they're 40 years old that are clean as a whistle. So to me, age is not as much of a factor as maintenance and taking care of the wells themselves. Type of wells, drilled, driven, or dug. I have yet to see any still in operation that have been dug wells. I've seen some, but nobody's drinking out of it. Just about everything that's out there that people are utilizing right now, just they've been drilled wells, which is the manner you see them being put in now. Location of or existence of abandoned wells around homes or farms. Couple of things. One, safety. And again, I've got some pictures. We'll touch on that in just a second. Knowing where wells are just in case they have not been abandoned properly and you simply have a hole. You don't want something or somebody to fall in it because, again, it is a safety point. But also, that's a conduit to our groundwater supply. So if something gets into that well casing, goes down, gets automatically into that aquifer, it can contaminate it, create a contamination plume, and it can move. This is also one of those reasons that I've said this a lot and I haven't shied away from it. I'm not a huge fan of pumping water into underground aquifers just because of the movement and the flow of those aquifers. It can contaminate things for miles. It's pretty wild. Products being stored in or around your well. Again, I think I've got some pictures of that. In a perfect world, if we could drill a well, we get good wellhead protection, and we have some type of house or structure over it, keeping it out of the wind, the rain, the weather, the elements, creatures, anything that could disrupt, contaminate your well. We want to make it clean, safe as possible. And I always encourage people, if you don't want to drink it or have it in your drinking water, I wouldn't store it adjacent to my well, because if anything spills, falls over, leaches right there into the soil, you have a rain, it goes straight down the side of the well casing, you've contaminated the aquifer, and then you cut your well and it pumps right back up. So just think about that. Again, these are the kind of the maintenance pieces we want to be aware of. When's the last time you screened or tested your well water? So again, this is one of those questions that it always amazes me, because again, we see the data. I've been looking at it for 20 years. Public water supplies, on average, you have a 0.01% bacteria presence from all the samples. Public water supplies are going to take multiple samples every single month. 0.01% is what we see from a bacteriological presence. And then when it comes to private wells, again, across all the states we've done work, 1 in 3 wells has bacteria. And typically when people talk to us or we go and see people, they're always very confident and complimentary of their private well. I love my well water, tastes great, best thing we ever had. So I like that. I think it's great. I wish more people trusted their water supplies like that. So I would encourage you, at a bare minimum, let's test it once a year. In a perfect world, you would run a sample once a month. Or if you noticed a difference in appearance, taste, color, odor, anything that's changed or anything that's off, look to get your well tested then. All right. Check valves or air gaps on all faucets and hose connections. One of the things that we typically find if people have like a small farm, they'll typically run a line from their well to water something, whether it's crops or whether it's animals. And then from an animal standpoint, a lot of times people will just drop a water hose over into a watering trough. And so what happens if we actually lose the well and you have a back siphon back into the system and you pull all of that watering trough water back into the system. And this is something that animals have been bathing in, swimming in, have their head in, whatever it may be, but it's just not a good practice to have. So if you could have an air gap, that's this very much natural process of preventing water from coming from one source into the line. So actually having a gap. So the end of the faucet is here, the tub is a foot below it. So if the water cuts on it, it has to drop a foot before it fills in. So if you lose pressure and you have a backside, all it's going to pull in is air, not the water from the trough. Thinking about the soil around your well, this is one of those pieces I don't think is 100% conducive to knowing what type of aquifer your well may be set in, but it may be more appropriate when we start thinking about our wastewater system and some type of leaches, thinking on the discharge whether we can actually put in a drain field or there has to be some type of above ground surface spray. All right, well casing, into the water table, thinking about how deep it is. Most well drillers, and I know I'm going to touch on this in a second when we start looking at well logs, but most well drillers will drill the well much deeper than they actually set the pump. And I think this is a wise decision, mainly if you do start seeing a drop in the water table, you do have the capacity to simply lower the pump some instead of having to drill a new well. All right, I like showing this diagram here because I am much more of a visual person and I like the visuals. So we actually took a drilling code and then made this image from that. So a couple of pieces I want to draw your attention to, and we'll kind of work left, right, down. But on the left here, you think about your septic tank and you think about the setback. Because as I like to say, one's trying to push water out and down and one's trying to pull water up. So the closer they are together, I'm gonna say kind of the worse off you potentially are. So I'm always an advocate for putting them as far apart as humanly possible. And if you know or can get a good idea of your kind of underground flow, how it moves, try to make sure that your well is upstream of your septic, so you will potentially have that movement away from the well. All right. Looking at your pressure tank, this may be one of those things that y'all say, hey, that's why do you even have to mention that? I've got this pressure tank above ground, but I have been to places where the pressure tank is buried. I think that's the worst thing in the world to do. Because for one, you can't even maintenance the pressure tank. You can't check to see if there's any issues. You can't easily replace it. I just think it's poor practice, but we do see it. They bury a pressure tank. I don't know. It's kind of wild. So In a perfect world, your pressure tank would be above ground, very accessible. That way, if you need to fix something, move something, change something upside, you can do it. Well casing, you see that I've got actually a slab and 12 inches above that slab. You do want to make sure that you have a good annular seal for at least 10 foot. Also being conscious of that drawdown, that cone of depression that you may see. And also know that this can change depending on the number of wells that are adjacent to you and the size that those may be. Because it can lower the entire water table. You can have multiple cones as they touch each other. Looking at your pump, when it comes to wells, you're typically gonna have one of two options. And I've seen them both, and I don't have preference one way or the other. You can have your submersible pump that's usually going to be in the bottom of this 4-inch casing. Or you can have the pump that's actually on top of the casing. And usually that's a smaller casing pipe. So instead of being a 4-inch, it may just be a 2-inch. And then also when we look at the well screen, and that's going to be based on whatever the well driller feels like is appropriate, adequate to provide good safety. So you're not getting a lot of sand in your well itself, but also allows the water to flow, water to come in. All right. A couple of things to think about. If in a perfect world, whenever you get your well drilled, the well driller would hopefully give you a copy of the log. I know some well drillers say they simply give like an invoice, and within that invoice, they give well information like the depth of the well, the depth they set the pump, the size of the pump, the size of the tank, the year of construction. These are just items that you would want to know or need to know. I'm gonna say for yourself, just in case somebody comes out to try to help you with something on your well. But also if you end up selling your home and you have a new homeowner, you can pass that off because that's good information to have. So I always encourage people to save that, keep up with that. And in today's climate where we can pretty much pinpoint GPS coordinates real easy. I mean, you can take your cell phone and simply get GPS coordinates. But tracking where a well is a great thing, because I'll guarantee you 90+% of private wells in Florida are not permitted. There's no real record at your state primacy. Nobody can go out and put their finger exactly on it from a record that's being held at an agency other than the homeowner or a well driller. So keep up with that information if you can. When you look at well logs, again, this will be the information that I think is ideal. If you can have it, if you can keep up with it, because when folks like myself or Laura, Andrea come out to try to help with your well, and we're looking at a couple of things here, which you can notice from this log here. It talks about the actual depth of the well. It talks about where the pump is actually set. So you get also the soil types as they're drilling the well, so you know what it's actually been drilled through. You have the date of construction, so you know the age of your well. These are all things that help because, you know, as I tell folks, whether it's private supplies or public supplies, just about everything with our sources has a lifespan, has a shelf life. That pump that's in the ground is only going to last you so many rotations. It will not last forever. So it's got a lifespan. It will fail at some point in time. So it's not a matter of if, it is truly a matter of when. When is it going to go out? So it helps to know that. And most pumps will last for a good while, especially if they're being used properly. They're not getting too much sand in there and your propellers are getting worn out. Also, if you're not having, you know, pressure tank issues, which is causing it to cycle excessively. There's a few items in there, but a pump should give you good time. But again, thinking about your well log, if you have your well log, pat on the back, that's great. I'm glad you have it. Please keep up with it. If you haven't drilled a well yet, once you get the well drilled, please ask for that well log so you have all of this information and data. I showed this here, and I got a couple slides back to back. And I would think Florida may have the exact same thing. We've got interactive maps. So when we start thinking about our water table depth or where we can get good water, what depth, y'all heard Andrea speaking earlier about the depth of these wells and how deep they're having to go. I get this question all the time. People call, they tell me what county they're in, and they say, hey, I want to drill a well. How deep do I need to go? And one of the reasons they ask that is, and again, y'all may know, may not know, most well drillers have a static number, and they'll say, you know, in this area we can get water at 250 foot deep. For that well, the pump, the drill, install, pressure tank, connected to your system, connected to your house, $6,000. If I have to go deeper than that, I'm charging you $20 a foot. So that you start thinking about how deep do we need to go, that starts equating to money. So again, this is just a kind of a GIS map, and then you can drill down here. And the reason I show this, because what I typically do will triangulate where somebody may be and then try to get the depth. Because when we look at these permitted wells, all of this data is recorded. As you can see here, there's an exact GPS coordinate, so we could literally walk straight to it and stand over the well itself. We know it's aquifer in, this one's in the Sparta. We know the water depth of that. So again, you can get a lot of good data from your permitted wells to let you know from a private well standpoint, this is probably how deep I need to be to get a good source of drinking water. And I show this, you should have, and y'all's may be Florida Department of Environmental Quality. You could utilize them for a lot of information. That is where I would encourage all of y'all to go. And there's going to be a lot of information about well drillers, permitted wells, any other kind of metering program. Just about every state, and I'm thinking it was required through EPA at some point in time. We're looking at when we're looking at source water assessments. So you start looking at these analysis so we can see the impact that wells may have, or an area, the impacted area around a well. So you just kind of know your I'm gonna say kind of area of influence that you may have. One of the reasons I talk about this is when we start thinking about how much emphasis or how much importance should I put on the safety of my private well. And I say, well, if we're going to treat it like it's a public supply, you need to know what are required of public supply. So when we think about our public water systems and the regulations that they go through with primary standards, with secondary standards, to me, that's a huge just kind of template or guide to what should we be interested in, or what should we potentially be testing for within our system. Whereas when we look at private wells, we don't really have any location requirements. If we do anything, we know that the well construction should be done per well drilling codes, which every state has, and we hope that's it. So I always press, if you're going to have well construction done, if you're going to have a well drilled, make sure you use a licensed well driller in your state, somebody that is legally capable, legally allowed to drill a well in your state, because there are standards, there are things they should know and do when it comes to drilling your well. Now, sadly, we do see wells drilled sometimes that aren't completely up to spec. And I really do think a lot of that's because there's no oversight. When they're not permitted, when there's nobody coming back to make sure that the well was drilled per well drilling specifications and nothing signed off on, some things get left. So that does bother me. So I always encourage you, make sure you get a good, reputable, licensed well driller to drill your well. Okay, so looking at Mississippi, I know I touched on this for just a second ago. We've got about 145 private wells across the state. That's a lot of holes punched in the ground. I know Andrea was just telling you earlier how many wells y'all have. I know she touched on Florida as well as Walton County. So again, a lot of private wells, a lot of holes punched in the ground. So when we think about potential contamination, how many people could be impacted by that. We're sitting at about 33%, 34% of private wells we're finding have total coliform bacteria present. We've done these workshops and these sampling campaigns enough. If I get more than about 20 or 25 samples, I mean, I can pretty much tell you our range is going to be about 30 to 40% will have bacteria present. Iron and the hydrogen sulfide, a lot of times that rotten egg smell. Those can be a nuisance, aren't necessarily harmful, but they can be a nuisance. And a lot of times I just encourage people to try to flush the system. Iron, you can filter that out. We've worked with a lot of systems where we're simply putting filters on to kind of catch that iron to clean it up. I will tell you this, I don't think I talked much about filters in here, but my one little piece before I move into looking at wells is if you are going to get a filter for your private well, make sure you know what the filter is for, or make sure you know what you want to filter for. Most things that you get at a store that are a filter are simply sediment filters. Perfectly fine. I mean, we use sediment filters all the time to try to filter out sand, grains, dirt. I mean, you may be getting some iron you can filter, just a sediment filter just to catch these things. But don't get a sediment filter thinking that you're going to solve a bacteria issue. So just make sure you know what your filter's for. All right, so a couple of things when we think about the safety of our well. Running a camera in these wells to see what is actually in the well that can be causing that contamination. So running a camera in wells is something that people use a lot. So look, here's a couple of things we've seen, just junk trash in a well. This one here, small rodent. This here, some other type of animal skeleton bone. I think you got some roots that just grow because you have an access or a crack or something in your well casing that allows them to move towards moisture. And again, we'll talk about that same thing when we hit on septic here in a second. A crack in your well casing that is allowing outside water to come into the well casing. This is one of my biggest concerns when we have private wells that come back with a bacteria and you chlorinate to disinfect, and you still have bacteria. Biggest concern I have is that there is some type of contaminant outside, and it's simply coming back into the well. Same thing here, holes in the well casing itself. The next, this picture here, you heard me talk earlier about your well and a storage shed and having something placed around it. And my go-to is, if you don't want it in your water supply, I would not put it in the shed. And you notice here, kind of to the bottom right here, immediately to the right, is the actual well casing itself. And we've got a turned over little handheld spray jug. We've got another empty gallon jug of something, or gallon jug of something here. We have a gas can on top of a bag of trash. We've got a paint jug. So there's a lot of things in here that we do not want in our water supply. Yet most people think, well, I've got a shed, might as well put it in there. I would encourage you, if you have this same scenario at your home, please pull those gases, the pesticides, pull that out of the shed, get that away from your water supply. Because goodness, I mean, we would not want it to get it in there to hurt you or anybody that's adjacent to you. So I encourage you to kind of get that out. So again, this is just me giving an overview of some of the things that we may see in our well. It's kind of strange, kind of crazy, but it does happen every single day. As much, I feel like I've been going around the country or the state for 10 years here, and we still see these issues. So that's one of the reasons I love that Laura and Andrea let us come talk. Is to me, this is just getting good information out so people know what to look for, things to avoid. All right. one question we get a lot, if I'm a test, what am I testing for? And where do I go? What do I do? I know one of my go-tos is always thinking about your state. They're going to have a certified lab program. So a certified lab to run my samples. I'm not saying you have to use a certified lab, but your first go-to is, hey, think about a certified lab. You should be able to go with your state primacy agency, and they should have a list of, say, hey, these are all the state certified labs in your area. But do know you can have very good labs that aren't state certified. Just putting that out there. Like our testing program here at Mississippi State with the Water Institute, we use EPA approved methods, but we're not a certified lab. We have a chem lab that's on campus here that is a state certified lab. So again, we're not using anything for compliance measuring. So I'm not as concerned about us being a state certified lab. We do a lot of just research with our data, even though we use approved method. All right, getting into the test itself. If I can only test for one thing, I'm testing for coliform bacteria. That's what I want to see. And most tests that we see, if you can test for coliform bacteria, you can also test for E. coli as a follow-up on that. Nitrates, also a good indicator. So those are two. If I was going to look at anything, I would look at those. Coliform bacteria, nitrate, that's what I would want to find. Again, you could follow up E. coli from a coliform bacteria test. Other items, fluoride, iron, lead, manganese, sulfates, pH. I typically check for pH if we're in the field. I've got a field meter, not necessarily if I bring the samples here. pH can be a good indicator of the corrosiveness that you may see with your home. Depending on the home plumbing, you can see an impact in your sinks and on your faucets with some type of discoloration. A lot of times they turn green if you've got some type of copper piping. Anyway, copper, hardness, zinc, cadmium, arsenic, chloride, and then turbidity, TDS, total dissolved solids, alkalinity. These are just items you could potentially look for. Now, the way we put this slide together, I'm going to give to Andrea and Laura. So if y'all want to share it, have it, you more than welcome to just use any of this information. All right, so a couple of tips. I'm going to kind of run down through here. We talked about keeping up with all your records as best as possible. I love the fact of keeping folders together, keeping all that information so you can see what was done, and you have this chronological time frame of it. Well logs, well tests, maintenance repair information. Also, you have heard me talk about not using fertilizers, pesticides, anything around your well. This is a very poor well example here, just because there is no wellhead protection. You simply have dirt straight up against the well casing itself, and then you have somebody spraying something around the well. Also trying to keep things around your well clean. So y'all heard me talk about that. Again, if possible, do some type of monthly or thorough inspection of your well casing, especially if you've had any type of weather issues or any type of damage around your well. Just trying to be conscious of it. Get your well inspected by a licensed well driller if needed. When we think about, and I think I get on this in just a second, in a perfect world, I would always tell you, try to utilize a licensed well driller, whether it's some type of maintenance with the well, whether it's trying to do disinfectant, shock chlorination of the well. Try to use a well driller, because this is what they do every day. This is their job. Now, I'm going to touch on this in just a second. We do have publications about disinfecting your well, where we try to talk people through a publication and visuals on how to do that, how to properly do that. So you're very capable of doing it yourself. And, I don't discourage anybody from doing it, but if you've got the means and you've got the time, please use licensed well driller to do that. Did I lose? All right, so about to get on abandoning wells, how to properly abandon wells. This is just a picture of animal a mule or donkey falling in a well, which is very likely to happen. So when we think about abandoning wells, have you seen a well? Do you know where one is? Was it covered? Because these are things that you can easily fall into. What you see on the left here is a well casing that's basically been broken off right there with the concrete slab. Biggest concern with that one to me, direct conduit to the groundwater. The one on the right is more of a dug well with rock encasing it, more concern there, somebody falling in, dying or drowning. So just be very conscious of those, and to me, take it upon yourself. If you've got one of these, please look to get it abandoned properly. Should the well be plugged or capped? If the well has not been used in 6 months, it should be plugged. I mean, literally, I've got a well sample running right now from somebody who has a well that they've had for years, just hasn't used it in years. And they just want to know if it was any good. I told them, I said, I can already tell you what's in it. But you may be able to clean it up and utilize it anyway, but they wanted to run it, so they did. However, the well is not deteriorated and has good casing, pump column, landowner may instead just cap the well. That's another option. One of the things, like at the top picture here, this is an old dug well. Probably the easiest thing to save you on buying a ton of concrete is to simply cap it, put something over it, kind of protect it, keep people from falling in it. The one on the bottom there, smaller casing, you can very likely backfill it with concrete and go ahead and seal it up. Landowner may plug wells with less than 100 feet of standing water in the well. So again, when it comes to wells, and y'all heard me say this, because wells are not regulated, because private wells are not regulated, not required to pull a permit, it leaves a lot of freedoms to the homeowners and the well owner itself to maintain and take care of. So when it comes to leaving it, if you need to abandon it, you have that right or capability. Again, I know I stated on here, but I would always encourage you to try to use a licensed well driller or contractor. All right, so I was going to touch on some of these publications just so y'all know what's out there. But y'all have a great resource with Laura and Andrea there that are, I'm gonna say, Florida natives. They're gonna have a better thumb on the pulse of what's going on with your well, with your area, with your geology, so they can help you in that regard. But Andrea may have already adopted some of these publications and utilized them in Florida. But ours are on our MSU website, so you can go on, you can pull them down, print them off, use them as you desire. And if you ever need, I'm gonna throw Laura and Andrea out there. If you ever need them, please call them. They can help you. And if they ever need me, they can call. So anyway, all right. Private well, this is just a very general overview of wells themselves, how to take care of the well, how to maintain the well. We have a self-assessment. I like the self-assessment because it enables a homeowner to simply do a kind of a checklist where you may walk through and ask certain questions, and based on the responses, high, medium, low, determine how sensitive your well may be to some type of contamination or some type of maintenance or repair. I showed this picture here. This is just another example of a well house we've been in that was built originally for a good purpose, and then as you see, a lot of things were put in around this well. But from this site here, we created this, which is a video on how to properly collect a well sample. So this is like I said, a 1:45 video on how to properly collect a well sample. So you can watch this video, and if you have any questions from it, of course you can call it. I'm just saying this should give you a very good, easy visual on how to actually collect samples, so that you make sure you're not the one contaminating the sample for the inspection. What to do about understanding that analysis. We get this question a pile of times. If people use either a private lab or a state lab, they just get the results back and nothing else. And they'll call and say, hey, what does this mean? So we try to walk people through that. I know I'm gonna talk about septics later, but just a couple of publications we have, managing household wastewater, and then we do also a self-assessment of septic systems as well. What to do about coliform bacteria in well water. So again, this is where we start talking about if you're finding coliform bacteria in your well, things you can do. Y'all saw this earlier. Again, this graphic we put together. I'm not sure if y'all have any issues with poultry production down in Florida, but we at one point in time we're having a lot of questions around because poultry are huge advocates and kind of utilize a lot of private wells in their facilities, and we have a lot of poultry operations up here. Laura, did you need me for something? I saw you step in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is that the end of the well part?
It can be.
Yeah, I was gonna say if we could just take a short little break, we're gonna try to get it back up on the screen here, but if everybody just wants to make a pit stop or give a 2 or 3 minute break, then we'll move on to the septics.
Sounds good. All right.
Okay, thanks.
Hey everyone, Jason, thanks so much for that information. I was just gonna add to what you presented to bring just some information about things here in Florida and where you can find some of the things that Jason mentioned. So I made a few notes and just to give some resources. And at the end of the presentation, we also have a slide on resources and we'll send all of that out to you. But Jason talked about testing and what's recommended to test here, very similar to what he presented. We follow the guidelines of the Florida Department of Health, where same as Jason mentioned, at a minimum annually to test your well for bacteria. So that's total coliform and E. coli. And talked about certified labs. So the best place to find out where you can do it throughout the year, where you can get your well water tested, is through your county health department. So for example, you would call the Walton County Health Department, and almost all of the health departments in the Florida Panhandle will have sampling kits and collect samples, as in you bring samples to them and they'll analyze them for total coliform and E. coli. If they don't, they will still have kits, and then you will collect the water, bring it back, and then they will send it out to another lab if they don't do it in-house. So for example, here you would go through the Walton County Health Department to get your bacteria and your total coliform, your E. coli test, your total coliform and your E. coli. The Florida Health Department also recommends, same as Mississippi, that you do a test for nitrate. So we can have, especially since we have very agricultural areas or historically ag areas, a lot of areas in the Floridan aquifer can be higher in nitrates. So if not annually, at least once every 3-4 years to have a test done for nitrate. And lead is another good one to do as well. If you're tapping into the Floridan aquifer, your pH tends to be quite high. Your water is not acidic, it's not corrosive. But for people that are in counties slightly west of us that are using the sand and gravel aquifer, that water can have very low pHs. It can be corrosive. And if you have older pipes, if you have solder, etc., you can have issues with lead. So again, doesn't have to be annually, but at least have it tested once, and then every few years to have your water tested for lead. Calling your county health department. If they don't accept samples for that, they will direct you to a lab that will. And much like Jason's program, we started doing our own. We have the Florida Well Owner Network, and we do host water clinics throughout the year in certain places where, although it's not a certified lab, we do use EPA standards and I'll test for your bacteria, total coliform and E. coli. And if we have one of those clinics in this area, we'll reach out to you and let you know. We tend to charge about half of what the Department of Health does. Then another thing that I wanted to mention quickly was Jason talked a lot about permitting and using a licensed well contractor. As I had mentioned before, here we would go through the Northwest Florida Water Management District. So if you don't have well records, if you don't have a lot of information, really good source, and I provide some of that in the resources part as well, is you would call the Water Management District and they could see if they have any information on your permit online. They tend to have records going back, if you're lucky, into the 80s, but anything before that is much harder to find. So I'll give you that information as well. And on their website, they have a link to certified well contractors. And as Jason mentioned, it's really important to try to go through a certified well contractor, and they have a working list of who's up to date in the area. And we also have through DEP that Map Direct, that GPS, that GIS system that Jason showed for Mississippi. We have an equivalent one through our Department of Environmental Protection, where you can see, as he mentioned, already drilled wells in the area, and you can have a sense for, hey, if you're looking to drill a well here, how deep would you have to go? That one is a little bit difficult to navigate, and you'll have my contact information at the end of this. And any questions you have, if you want to see some of that information, I can walk you through both the Water Management District website and the DEP website. Because I had to be walked through. It's not all that intuitive. So Jason, that is all I wanted to add to the information that you provided. Thanks again. And that's just a little bit more local information for the people that are here.
Yeah, so Jason, if you want to go ahead and share your screen again
All right.
for the septic portion.
Can you see me? Is it up?
It is. And I just wanted to remind everybody, like Andrea said, we will be sending out the recording and the different resources out through email after this is over as well. So.
All right, we ready to rock and roll? Laura, we good?
Yeah, Jason, you can go ahead.
Okay, all right. Well, good deal. So on the front end, we talked about stuff coming in. Now we're going to talk about stuff going out. So one thing we see, if you have a private well, septic typically goes hand in hand. You got a private well and you have on-site wastewater, you have septic. I do believe if they are installed properly, the right location, get proper management, proper oversight, private wells and on-site wastewater can be great options for drinking water and wastewater treatment and disposal. So I'm a huge advocate for that because I believe there is a place for them, and where we need them, they can be utilized. So just an outline here when we think about what is our on-site systems, why should we be concerned about it, kind of the evolution of treatment, function of the tank, evaluating your tank operation, when should we pump it, which is one of the key pieces, and then how to live with the septic system. Got this cool outhouse here, just from the standpoint of what we used to have and used to see. You would have one central location, you'd have a dug pit in which all the waste would fall, because there is a very natural process in which the good bacteria will break down the waste. So we've grown a lot over the I'm gonna say decades and centuries to where we actually have good treatment processes. And even now today, you look, we can treat wastewater for cities and towns with hundreds of thousands of people on a very small footprint, mainly because we're adding elements to it, adding water to it, speeding up that process so that we can treat more, small footprint, quicker time frame. All right. I love showing this picture here. And I've got some others. We on occasion will do some drive during the dry part of the year, because you can very much see where there are systems that have issues. So in this case here, you have a leach field that's very likely clogged in some sort. So you're getting a lot of your moisture and nutrients that are simply coming to the surface. And as a result, you see these nice green, dark, lush lines of grass in the yard. And some of y'all may start noticing that because I don't know if y'all are like we are. We're in a huge kind of dry spell right now. We really need a lot of rain. So anywhere that there is moisture, there's nutrients, you're going to see excessive green. You can see some defined lines. This is another one where we're actually seeing waste simply coming to the surface because, you know, a lot of folks don't realize as soon as you flush the toilet, as soon as you kind of open the faucet, whether it's in the kitchen or the bathroom or some type of laundry, that water, that wasted water, that contact water is going somewhere. And if it's not able to be processed through the tank treatment and then out through the field lines and absorbed into the soil, it's going to back up. It's going to come to the surface. It's going to come back. Like it's going to go somewhere. So when you are having issues, you see what we just saw, kind of some surface display. This is around the tank itself. It's going to go somewhere. So let me think. Yeah. So when we think about the evolution of this wastewater, this evolving goal of just going away versus treatment. So we're trying to get to this point where we're actually treating wastewater instead of it just going away. Also, when we think about the public health benefits to adequate treatment. And to me, I'm a huge advocate for our agencies that have to oversee wastewater treatment, wastewater disposal, because it is going somewhere. You know, when we realize where our wastewater goes and the impact that it may have on us or a neighbor or other people, that should all make us more aware of how safe it needs to be whenever we have some type of wastewater discharge. Because again, we want to be able to utilize it and then treat it before it gets put back into the environment. So management, disposal, often no management at all. The dispersal of it, the system management is critical. So we want to make sure that we maintain our systems so that they are treating properly. One of the key things I always say, if we're going to do anything, let's make sure we're pumping our tanks on an adequate cycle. And again, there's too many graphs and tables out there that give you an idea of when you need to actually pump. So when we think about this evolution of wastewater, we've moved into this point where we're actually trying to treat it before it goes out so that it's safe and it's not having a negative impact on any of our environment. All right. I like this picture here. And again, we try to, I'm gonna say, do our best to draw the connection between our private wells, which is our drinking water source water coming up, and our septic, and when our wastewater has gone through a settling and a treating process and moved into the leach field and hopefully being absorbed down through the soil, because the soil can be very much a treatment disinfectant on that effluent that's going out. And then as you see here, you kind of have this groundwater flow, and you would, and again, in a perfect world, have the well upstream of that groundwater flow with your effluent moving into the soil, so that if anything, it's moving away from your well casing. But there is a connection. I mean, people need to realize and understand that there is a connection between wastewater and wastewater discharge and our private wells, in which we're actually pumping water out of the ground, typically at a shallow pace. All right, so how do these systems work? So when we think about, I've got listed on here the hydraulic and the organic loading. So hydraulic, we think about basically the volume of water. How much water are we going to be putting into the system? How much wastewater is actually going to be going into the tank itself? And then from an organic loading, when we think about the solids, the actual waste that's in the water, what is that going to be? And then when we think about the site, we need to this here, like you're seeing in the picture, very sandy soil. you could usually have pretty good absorption, leaching into this soil. So you could put in leach fields and typically have no problem. And you just want to make sure that it can get treated and get into the soil. Choosing the final treatment and dispersal, that's what I was just talking about, leach fields versus a mound system versus a subsurface drip versus a spray field, whatever that may be. Hopefully, I heard Andrea talk about the Florida Department of Health. Typically, when we see in states, there will be an agency that will come out and they'll do like soil percolation tests to see what is acceptable for this area, what is acceptable for this treatment. Also, sometimes you may see sizing capacity. They may say, hey, if you're going to have a septic, you need at least 2 acres. I mean, there may be a sizing option. All right, so moving forward, this is just looking at the tank. So kind of moving from left to right. Again, you have the inlet pipe coming in. As you notice, the T going down, because you don't want that scum layer at all to be able to come back or potentially clog a line of any sort. That's why you'll see it turn down, running into that initial layer, that initial chamber where hopefully your solids settle out, and that's a key area of needing to get pumped. It is good if you have exposed risers so that you can access the tank when needed, pump the solids. Not always a bad thing if you can't access them, as long as you know where they are, so they can be dug up and accessed when you need to actually pump it. You'll typically see a baffle, which allows your solids to settle out in the first chamber, your fluid, your liquids to move over into the second chamber. You'll still have some settling that goes on there, but you'll create a scum layer. And then also your outflow pipe, your effluent pipe going out, same thing, turn down, because again, you don't want any of that scum layer clogging the pipes. Definitely don't want it getting into your discharge box or your leach field itself. But talking about the different type of tanks, I know I'll hit on that in just a second. Concrete, fiberglass, polyethylenes of some sort. Talking about the process itself, your heavier solids will settle out, the lighters will float, move over into the next chamber. We do have good bacteria that'll break down that sludge, break down that waste. That's why you can have a tank, rule of thumb, a lot of people will just say 3 years. But again, there are charts based on the size of the tank, the number of people in the household, to give you a good idea of how often you should pump the tanks because of the solids buildup. That's what we want to know. That's what we'll be conscious of. All right, so looking at tanks, this is a picture. You see some concrete, fiberglass. I don't have and then the polyethylene are just like the plastic tanks. I would say, and again, this is just my professional opinion, I think it's kind of like if somebody drives a Cadillac or if somebody drives a Prius, you just have different kind of values of that form of transportation, but they both get you from point A to point B. Typically, you see the concrete tanks are going to be a little bit more expensive, probably give you a lot longer lifespan, but maybe susceptible to cracking. The plastic tanks, the polyethylenes, a lot less expensive. But I do think you can get just as good a job out of one or the other. Again, I have no stock in any, but again, the concept is what I really appreciate more than anything. And again, I have seen a lot of very strange options for wastewater treatment. So again, as long as you've got one that's built and designed to actually treat wastewater, that's what I would tell you to go with. All right, I like this scenario here. Again, we're making that connection between our septic and our groundwater, but this is just a clear, diagram of moving from the house into a septic tank, into a distribution box, and then out into the drain field. And then we're seeing where you're having this leaching, where the water is moving into the soil. So you have this kind of this treatment process that's going on. Hopefully it's entering into the water table. because it's got to go somewhere or it will go somewhere. Now, ultimately, you want all of your solids staying in the tank. You don't want anything to move into the leach field because, of course, just like gravity, fall into the bottom of your drain field lines, clog them up, and then what are you going to have? You'll have potentially leaching up, and you'll end up just like that yard I showed you earlier with a excessive green grass directly over these leach lines. Again, this is just another diagram, a little more specifics when we think about the build out that you may see, just talking about that influent pipe come in, kind of the number of inches that we like to see. Below that, moving into the baffle where it would flow to the outfall pipe, looking at the sludge layer, where that may be, thinking about your clean out pipes, how big those things need to be so that you can access them. And I would encourage y'all to think that when you buy these tanks, just about everyone that I've seen that is purchased from a dealer is going to have these specs already kind of built into it. So, all right. The one thing I want to kind of draw out of this picture diagram here is the outfall pipe that has the filter in it. It is considered another kind of baffling system, but it is a filter from your tank into that outfall pipe. So it is critical that we retain the solids within the septic tank. As you heard me say, we don't want those moving into the drain field. Laura, is everything all right? You're muted.
Yeah, one of our computers died, but we're okay.
Okay, keep going. Okay, all right. All right, so these are the different types of baffles that we may see. The top left here is one that's just a plastic baffle around that outfall. The bottom left is an actual concrete baffle. The one to the right is a PVC T, and as you can see, it actually has a screen inside that baffle. That is something that I typically don't see a lot of where we are. But I tell people if you do have one, my encouragement to you is to actually check them quite often, clean them, because they do serve a good purpose, trying to keep those solids out of the drain field itself. So, all right, looking at the structure, looking at the conditions of your system, very similar to when we think about our wells and using licensed well drillers, licensed well contractors. You can have, certified installers of septic, certified inspectors. So these are the people that I would use when we look at systems. If you think you have an issue, because again, when they're installed properly, operated properly, and maintained, you can get a good process. So it's good to know that you have a licensed or certified installer or inspector that checks on your systems when you may have a question or something. But all right, this is where we're going to go into some of the designs that we will see. Now, what you're seeing here, when we think about proper design, when we think about the options that are out there, distribution box flowing out into these PVC lines, which is going to give us 5 leach field lines, covered back up with sand, and then you're going to see backfill with another dirt. Again, there is a method to the madness on the number of lines, the size of lines, and the distance that the lines may be run to get optimal flow, to get optimal discharge in your system. I don't know that I list that on here, but if anybody needs that, believe me, I can get that and get it to you. All right, again, this is one where we have a gravel kind of a backfill. I've never seen this actually in practice. I've never been out to a site where we're actually backfilling with gravel. I mean, you got that's a lot of weight, that's a lot of money. Now over here to the right where you may see a line and you may see one trench that has a gravel bed, I have seen that. And that's mainly with some of these smaller systems that may have one like 10-inch field line, maybe 100 or 200 foot. They may do just one bed. just giving a little bit more permeability so it's not just packed right back in the soil. All right, so y'all have heard me talk about our kind of our treatment process and the soil being used as an option for treatment. So when we think about the wastewater moving into your septic tank itself, you've got a couple of things going on in there. Your solids actually settling out, your good bacteria working on the solids to breaking it down, moving it into our distribution, our effluent, moving into the distribution. You have your leach field, your drain field. And then once it percolates through the soil, you should have some type of kind of filtration, disinfection. Like the soil can be a great filter for our wastewater before it actually meets into the groundwater itself. So making sure that we have a good soil, a good option for that wastewater to actually be leaching into. That's why not all areas are, I'm gonna say, able to be have leach field or drain fields in them. They have to have some other type of system, which we'll get into in a second, such as like the mounds or the over the surface spray. All right, so I use this is this is just a diagram of going through how the wastewater process works with the water and the solids coming in, settling out, moving into the chamber, and then moving out into the drain field itself. You're just seeing that process in action just through this kind of picture tutorial. You're seeing, I think the next one's going to go. All right, so you have adequate, and this, I moved it to the next one. This is when you have an issue and your solids move into it and what the impact that you see with your leach field. So you're seeing this kind of this excess of your solids moving out and how it can impact your drain field area. So you can be kind of loading that soil up. All right. So again, just another kind of picture diagram. I like this one. It's a little bit clearer, but based on just the flows that we just saw, think about your solids settling out, moving across, getting into either a gravel bed or sand bed to allow adequate, appropriate leaching. So this is just the regular piping in gravel. This is and some of y'all may have seen these discharge drain field pipes, these larger diameters. Again, they're going to have you're going to have your percolation holes within the pipes themselves, which allows that water to leach out into the soil. And typically you'll see those if they're in a good sand bed, good soil for absorption, or you may see them in some type of gravel. Again, I'm trying to allow some good leaching of that water into the soil so that's not building up or backing up into the system. This is just a closer up with that exact same shot. Leach chambers. I think I've got a real-time picture of one of these. When we start looking at another option of when we discharge our wastewater out of the tank, it's getting into the leach field. They do have leach chambers. This is another view of these leaching chambers, and you have an inspection. And I think I've got another. So this is a real time. We look at these leach chambers. So again, this is just an option for wastewater discharge, an option for wastewater treatment and discharge that is available. So never think or just assume that when we have wastewater discharge or wastewater systems that are decentralized, that they're just a single tank with a single line. We always want to make sure that it's safe, clean, and not having a negative impact on our environment. Some of our systems, if you're going to go through like a subsurface drip or pressured system, you're going to have some type of tank to move it, because with our leach field systems, we're simply allowing the gravity to flow and move the system, move the water throughout the system. But if you're not going to have that in place, you're going to have some type of process to move the water. So these tanks work very similar to wastewater lift stations that may be in a public supply, work on a float system. As it gets to a certain level, cuts the pump on. As the water drops, cuts the pump off. Again, just another process, another option. Low pressure systems, supply line coming in. Again, you have some type of aggregate that the distribution is in, hopefully allowing it to leach into the soil properly. This is when we start seeing a kind of a subsurface drip here. You're kind of moving it again into a pressurized system so that it can pump it out into those lines to allow it to leach. All right, so thinking about our systems mainly in a vein of not having construction around it or not having a negative impact on the system and the process, and making sure that it's working properly. Cover crops can be really good because again, they can take up nutrients, they can help stabilize the soil, prevent erosion, good microorganisms into the soil can help. One of the things that we preach all the time is not parking vehicles on top of drain fields, not driving over septic tanks themselves. Don't build anything on top of it. Try not to plant trees, bushes, shrubs around drain fields, because again, you're putting an excessive amount of moisture into the soil every single day just by naturally living there. And we all know plants such as trees, bushes, shrubs, they're going to seek out the moisture. So they're going to go towards where there is moisture. So if you plant them there, do not be surprised if your drain field gets inundated with a root or roots, plural, in the future. And if you drive over your systems, do not be surprised if you potentially get compacted soil that affects the leaching, or you get crushed field lines because of the pressure of heavy vehicles. All right. Looking at aerobic systems, I've started to see some of these systems being built and installed here recently. I'm gonna say indifferent about whether we use an aerobic system. Some people seem to like them, or some people seem to want them. But one thing we are doing, you potentially have a smaller tank just because you're adding air, which is kind of speeding up our treatment process. And then when it moves out to a line, they're dropping in some chlorine, because chlorine is just a disinfectant for bacteria. Chlorine, small amount of detention time can kill bacteria. So if you introduce chlorine, you can kill bacteria, which should hope for your surface spray to be bacteria free, so that if you are having to spray on a surface that is utilized where people are, kids play, anything of that nature, you would hope that it's bacteria free. The aerobic treatment units, again, aerobic air, we're adding air into a system. Y'all heard me talk about, from our public supply standpoint, one of the ways that we increase the capacity of our systems is by adding air, adding movement to the wastewater itself. And it's no different here on a single use. So with these aerobic units, you're simply adding air into the treatment system, which speeds up that treatment process, gives the bugs some oxygen to live, help consume the bacteria. All right, so this is a disinfectant, not sterilizer as we listed here. So when we use chlorinator, when we use chlorine tablets, please make sure that you're using the sanitizing tablets, the ones that we would use for a wastewater treatment system, not chlorine tablets. And one way, and y'all may know this, may not, typically the sanitizing tablets are a little bit smaller so they don't get stuck in the tubes themselves. Pool tablets are a little bit bigger, so if you use them by accident, typically they will kind of crust and get kind of stuck in those pipes. Just be conscious, make sure you're using the right type. UV is a very good option, and backing up into our private well conversation. I like UV for small volume private wells as a potential disinfectant source, because you can get a good filter system, like a sediment filter followed by UV, you can have a good, safe, clean water supply. Anyway, it can be used, but again, you're going to have some type of system in order to do it. So distribution, pump tank, tray, spray field, subsurface. You've heard me mention those. So spray fields, high potential for human contact, which most people would think that. So it is effluent. It's not drinking water, which we hope most folks know. That's one of the reasons we make chlorinates. We have it. It's disinfectant. It's safe, or at least safe as it can be, being sprayed on the soil. So the soil is part of its final treatment. You know, we've talked about that even from our leach field standpoint. So healthy cover crop is essential for this system to function. And, you know, I would say everything I've seen, they've all been in residential settings, very much just like this, on a yard. So people, you know, cut the grass on top of it, and it just provides some type of cover crop, such as a person's lawn. So it does work. All right. Subsurface drip, again, just another outlet to move the wastewater out of the system into an area where it can be released and absorbed into the soil. This is a graphic. This is a real life example here, you know, under the soil. This, I think my next slides will show where we're covering this up, and you see what you get there. So again, there are multiple processes and options for the actual discharge effluent from our septic system. So feeding the systems, conventional, I'm gonna go back, conventional and aerobic systems. So you're seeing the fats, oils, and greases here. This is, you know, in the industry, a lot of people just call it the FOG, the fats, oils, and greases. And I stress to people all the time, please, if you can, be conscious. And fats, oils, and greases can affect not only your private system, they can also affect public water supplies and public wastewater system. So, to the best of your ability, once it's cooled, I feel like you got to tell everybody that. Try to put it in the trash. Try to put it in the garbage, not down your sink drain, because they can just clog up lines, cause massive amounts of issues. So fats, oils, and greases, try to get them out. We do talk about this, dishwashers, laundry machines. They put a lot of loading onto our septic systems themselves. So just being conscious about that, trying to spread out loads as much as humanly possible. I know I've got garbage disposals on here. I draw that attention to the incinerators that people have on their a lot of times mainly on their kitchen faucet, kitchen sink. I mean, they're, you know, being there to help with the flow, to get any solids kind of broken up so that it moves through the system. I really don't like them being called garbage disposals, because if you look on them, I've yet to see one that actually said garbage disposal. Typically, they all say incinerators on them, but it does help with the flow, and I encourage people to have them, just so if there are any solids or meats or anything that get into your sink, they can be ground up and moved. Dishwasher, laundry. If you can space out, and again, I'm one of those that I need to practice what I preach, because I do the laundry at our house. I'm a little OCD about laundry, so I do it, and I typically do it all in one day. So as much as we probably need to space it out and do half one day, half another, if not some, you know, over a 3 or 4 day period. But again, I'm too OCD about it, so I like to get in there, get it done, and move on. But if possible, spreading it out, just because it does put extra loading onto your system. All right. From bathrooms, what I typically say, if it's not human waste or toilet paper, it does not need to go in your toilet itself. And I've got listed here: urine, feces, soap, toilet paper. only thing that should be going down your toilet drain itself. And you see over here, if you haven't eaten it first, it doesn't need to go in there. All right, so toilet paper, you can have excessive uses of that can cause some buildup. We've got rental property here in Starkville. So we typically see that in households where we may have 3 or 4 young ladies living there. That seems to be more areas where we see it, but just being conscious of the impact that massive amounts of toilet paper can have on the system. It's a lot harder on your septic than it may be in a public supply because it can get out mixed with other wastewater, but still it can have an excessive issue. Excessive amounts of toilet paper can have an issue on your system. All right, I know we're kind of rounding out, but some operation and maintenance of it. I know I talked about this as far as getting your septic system pumped on a frequent basis. Main thing, keep up proper operations, and also so the solids don't build up and get into your drain fields. That's what we want to prevent. So I know in a second here, I've got the kind of a chart we can look at. Yeah, so thinking about when we need to do it. Rule of thumb, a lot of people just say 3 years, pump it every 3 years. But again, there's a little bit more of a method to the madness. And then also whenever your solids reach about a quarter or a third of a way through that first chamber is what I like to think. That's where you'd like to get those solids pumped. But in order to do that, somebody's got to get there's actually a stick that you can check the sludge depth with. But again, I would encourage you to call a licensed certified pump installer or somebody that's licensed to pump septic tanks to come do that and check it for you. This is the pumping requirements that I would say, and I don't think I put a list on there, but for instance, I'll use, if you look over here, this 1,000 gallon, we've got a camp that I put a 1,000 gallon tank on it. And there's typically 3 of us that are there. Now, again, this is based on a regular household use. But even if we were there at the regular household 1,000 gallon, 3 years, 3.7 years, we would need to pump our tank. So again, this is kind of the method to the madness of when you would need to pump your tanks. All right, that is my walk through the wastewater system basics. So thank y'all. Laura, do you want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, that was great. We'll have you stop sharing, and then I think Andrea has another little bit of presentation to do as well.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you, Jason, very, very much. That was excellent. That was really complete. I did want to add just a few little bits of information regarding septic systems here in Florida. So when Jason showed the diagram of the well and the septic system, and we were talking about separation distance, and he did mention the further away, the better. That's absolutely true. The rule in Florida, per Florida statutes, is that the septic system has to be at least 75 feet away from your private well. So that's the only way that you're going to get a well and a septic system that are being installed permitted. The second thing, when Jason was showing types of septic systems that we have, the ones that you tend to see here are the conventional septic systems. And then you also see mounded systems in certain areas. And that has to do with the fact that in Florida, our laws state that you have to have at least 2 feet of separation distance from the bottom of the drain field to the high water table. So there have to be at least 2 feet of soil below the drain field that effluent, that wastewater is percolating through before it hits the high water table. If you don't meet that, then you see these mounded systems, particularly close to the coast, like I know Cedar Key, other areas, or in other parts. It's because you don't meet those separation distance requirements. And when Jason showed the ATUs, the aerobic treatment systems and things like that, we are seeing more and more of these advanced treatment systems, which are different from your conventional one. And depending on where you live in Florida, I don't think Walton County has these requirements right now, but a huge concern for us is the fact that conventional septic systems were never built to, they were built to process wastewater and process pathogens. That's why they're called septic systems, and to treat it in terms of the bacterial content and things like that and other pathogens. But they were never designed to reduce nitrogen, right, from leaching down into those groundwater systems. And so even if you have a perfectly well-maintained septic system, approximately 30% of the nitrogen that goes in leaves is only 30% of 30 oh, I'm getting confused. Only 30% of the nitrogen actually is processed. And so we do lose a lot of nitrogen into underlying groundwaters, right? It only treats about 30%. So in Florida, we are seeing a lot more advanced nitrogen treatment systems, and they're being required in areas because we want to minimize the amount of nitrogen that is flowing into our groundwater sources that eventually gets to our surface waters. And then what I was going to add, one thing about maintenance, and we often get a lot of questions about additives. People say, hey, so there's a lot of products out there that are recommended in terms of adding to your septic system to get things going, to help reduce that sludge, et cetera. And really, there's not a lot of scientific literature that backs that these products actually are treating that waste in your septic system. So really, there isn't a lot of scientific evidence that backs that it actually does improve the functioning of your septic system. So really the rule of thumb is that the naturally occurring bacteria that you have in there is doing the job that it's doing. And if you follow the maintenance procedures that Jason talked about and are really mindful about what goes in there, as well as your water use, the naturally occurring bacteria in your tank should do the trick. It's a little bit confusing because the Department of Health does have a list of approved additives for Florida, but the key is that they're only approved because they're shown not to harm the environment. It's not an endorsement of products, right? So the things that you see at Lowe's, the things that you see at Home Depot or other, they're approved by the Department of Health to be used in your septic system, not because they're recommended to improve the functioning of it, simply because they don't harm the environment. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right.
You mean they're trying to make money?
They are trying to make a lot of money off of us. So now what I'm gonna, go ahead.
Have the issue of the flushable wipe.
Yes.
So, do you have any information on that?
Sorry, Laura. So yes, we have a question from the audience here about flushable wipes. And what I wanted to say is that flushable wipes do not decompose in your septic system. So really a lot of times, and Jason, you can add to this, but a lot of times the fibers that they're even made of have a lot of nylon and other things. So they really are not anything that the bacteria naturally can break down in your septic system. So one thing that I say, and we're not saying that you can't use flushable wipes, just don't put them down your toilet. I don't know if that sounds, what we recommend is you can have, just like you do when you have a baby, right? And you use the wipes to wipe you just dispose of those in a trash can that you have next to your toilet. You can still use them, but just don't dispose them down your septic system. Yeah. Did you want to add anything about flushable wipes, Jason?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of points. One is, this is the lawyer coming out at me. They are called flushable wipes because you can flush them. There's a lot of things you can do that doesn't make it right. So yeah, they're flushable because you can flush them, but you can flush diapers, you can flush a lot of things that don't need to be in the system. But I will say this, from a public water standpoint, we have trade associations that are coming together across the country, filing enormous suits against these companies because they're calling them flushable wipes and they're causing massive amounts of damage on public water supplies. So if we know that it's doing that with our public systems, it would also have an impact on our on-site wastewater systems. And as Andrea was saying, One of the biggest issues with them is because of the fibers that they're made up, they're not breaking down and dissolving like toilet paper would. So you get clogging, you get a lot of issues with flushable wipes actually being put into the system. So yeah.
Yeah, a lot of wastewater treatment operators definitely curse the flushable wipes. It's
Mhm.
a big
I've heard
problem.
things.
Yeah.
But really, if you think of them like baby wipes, what do you do with baby wipes? You put them in a trash can. You can still use the flushable wipes, just put them in a trash can is what I always like to say.
Or get a
Yeah.
bidet.
Or get a bidet. Exactly. Do we have any other questions? All I wanted to finish up on was, because we are in Florida and this is sort of hopefully end of hurricane season, I did want to just bring up a presentation on what to do if your private well or your septic system are flooded, or if you have power outages because of storms. And what we have learned, unfortunately, is that it doesn't take a hurricane to cause floods, right? So we also have had a lot of rain events. The Panhandle actually gets the highest amount of rainfall in all of the state of Florida. We get at least, like the average is about 65 inches. And I think that's moved up per year. That's moved up to 67 inches. And what we are seeing is that even outside of hurricane season, we get a lot of these torrential rains. So what I was going to do is, this won't take very long. Really, a lot of it is common sense, but just to get us thinking about what to do if we have wind damage, if we have heavy rain and flooding, and what happens with power outages. So just to complement a lot of what Jason has already presented today. So when a hurricane comes through, wind damage, we're all very familiar with this, our power tends to go out. And we saw this with Hurricane Michael, where it was a very strong storm, very quick moving. We didn't have a lot of flooding, but we had a ton of power outages and people that had power outages of 3 weeks and more. And so if you think about your well, the only way that you're going to get well water is you have a pump, right? And so when your power goes out, your well is not pumping water. So if you lose power, what we do encourage is just to make sure, be mindful of that well and of that well pump, and turn off your pump at the circuit breaker and leave it off during the storm. Again, a lot of this is common sense. And if you don't have access to your well, especially if it will be a longer power outage, just to be thinking about having that emergency enough sufficient potable water on hand for you to supply your family and your pet at least for 3 days. And I have a little graph on that of how to calculate and how much of that means per person. Then this is something that we saw in Michael, and we really try to get this message out to people that if you're going to use a generator to run your well pump during a power outage, especially an extended power outage, to go ahead and have, well beforehand, have connections established by a licensed electrician so that you can connect your well pump with your generator, and that you can have that power supply be used as you're accessing your well pump as well, right? And really making sure that it's a licensed electrician, just so that you don't have many accidents regarding that. So once the power is restored, if your well was flooded, of course, you're not going to turn the pump on until the system has dried out. In a perfect world, as Jason likes to say, you want all of this checked out by a qualified electrician, right? But just be really mindful that everything is dried out. And the pump may need to be cleaned of silt and sand if it was flooded, right? So again, if you are concerned about it being damaged, just get assistance from a licensed contractor if you can. So what happens to a well during a flood? So this is just a basic diagram of a well. We have a submersible pump there. When a flood hits, so this is the flood water and your wellhead is submerged, the way your well water can be contaminated, and I just want you to be mindful of different ways that it can be contaminated and things that you can do around your house before hurricane season, just to make sure that these things are in place to reduce the possibility of having your well be contaminated. One, if you don't have a good well seal, if you don't have a very good sanitary seal on your well, you can have cracked plugs, for example. It can go in there, so flood water can get directly into your well, down to where you're drawing water from having an improperly sealed well cap. So that's one type of maintenance that you can do to just check that. And Jason talked about different ways to check it. Another way is that if you don't have that concrete slab that he was talking about around your well, and you don't have a good grout, if your grout is cracked, the flood water can actually also have this like preferential flow right along that borehole outside of your casing, straight down into where, again, you're drawing water from your well. So that's another way that contaminated flood water can get in there if you don't have a concrete pad, or if you don't have that grout, if that grout is not properly sealed. Another way too is simply if you're in an area where you have a relatively shallow well, if you're drawing from a superficial aquifer, or you're in an area where your aquifer is not confined, you don't have those hard clay layers that are separating more of that surface percolation from where you're drawing your water from, can simply seep down into those areas, especially if you have a shallower well, and you can be drawing water directly that way. That might take a little while longer, but that's one way that your well water can be contaminated. And finally, you can't forget about neighboring sources of water, right? So Jason was talking about movement of water down in your aquifers. And again, if you have a shallower well, maybe more in your sandy soils, that movement is much faster. Then takes a little while longer if you have a deeper well that's drawing from the Floridan aquifer. And after Hurricane Irma and after a lot of these, we were seeing contaminated well water that was dark in color. And that was from wells that were shallow and very close to flooded rivers. So you could there after a few days see the impact of river water flooding getting into those shallow wells and being drawn up. So this is just a slide to get you thinking about how your well can be contaminated and why it's so important, why we recommend testing after any kind of flood. And the potential for contamination is even greater if your septic system is damaged or your septic system is flooded. So again, if your septic system and your drain field are flooded, it's not processing that wastewater, it's not processing those pathogens, everything is sort of sitting there, it's moving around laterally, horizontally, and your well can become contaminated that way. So, what we recommend is simply to test your water, not simply, but to really test your water, especially if your well was flooded or if you suspect it was. That's the only way for you to know for sure if your water does not have that bacterial contamination in it. If you're not sure if it was flooded, just assume that it was and test. And again, at a minimum, have it tested for total coliform bacteria and E. coli. If there's tests come out positive, DOH does recommend that even if you have a positive total coliform test, to have your well disinfected. And Jason mentioned literature on how to do it yourself. We also have a publication on how to do it yourself. If you're not comfortable doing that, then you would hire a licensed contractor and they would shock chlorinate or disinfect your well for you. Before receiving your test results, it's just really important to use an alternative water source, whether you're getting that from boiling water yourself or from bottled water, etc. Yeah, so what about your septic system? So a lot of the pictures that Jason showed and the whole, like the bulk of the treatment is in that drain field, and it relies on that percolation, that moving through that soil profile to treat that wastewater. So you can imagine that if all of that is flooded, you don't have that percolation, you don't have that wastewater being treated. And so you can assume that it's not being treated, right? And it's flooded. So what you don't want to do is add additional water, additional pressure to that flooded area and that tank, right? Because it can't, the drain field isn't able to truly drain if that water is still, if that soil is still waterlogged. So if you're cleaning up any water in your home, just make sure that you're not pouring that into your toilets or into your sinks, you take that somewhere else outside, et cetera, and you put, because you don't want to add an additional source of water to your septic system. And then if you do suspect damage, if things aren't draining as they should, even if floodwaters have receded or other areas are, that's when you call in a septic professional to see if your septic system was actually damaged during that storm. Finally, when soil is waterlogged, it's really susceptible to compaction. So that's an area where you really want to protect that soil conductivity or that drainage through the soil by reducing your activity in that drain field area. So don't dig around the tank or the drain field or while things are still wet. And you should never use any heavy equipment in the area, but especially not if it's waterlogged. After a lot of our storms, we do have tree damage. We get people out there, contractors, et cetera, or ourselves removing limbs, removing things. And that's where you really want to make sure that they're not driving any type of heavy equipment if you're having any tree removal done over that drain field area. So sort of mark that drain field area and make sure that if you have any kind of tree removal around there, that they're avoiding your drain field. Yes, and we have a question from the audience.
Yeah, I had a huge tree in my yard that was dead, and I needed to cut it down because it was close to the house. And so I trusted the tree company to cut the tree down. I went off work, came home, walked in my backyard, and the tree was still there, but on the ground, cut in these big pieces. And I see these big things in my yard, and I walk up to it, and there's this huge hole, and I'm like, what happened? And I didn't realize, but the tree fell and crushed the concrete top that was pretty big and busted the whole top. And so they had to reconvene to figure out the next step.
Of your septic tank. Yeah, that's terrible. Yeah. We have another question from, I think everyone can hear it, right?
Power outages,
Mhm,
wells,
mhm.
that you turning, when you lose power, turning off the power to your well. Is that because of a concern of electrical surge when the power comes back on, or because it's flooding?
Largely electrical surge when it comes on is a big concern. But Jason, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
If
Yeah,
you have a full
surge.
house surge compressor. Is that still recommended?
I
You'll
don't
have to
know.
repeat that question. I can't hear what you're saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. So Jason, the question, and I don't know the answer to that, Jason will know, is, so the concern with, turning your electrical system on, like your pump, your well, et cetera, after, we recommend that you turn off if you have flooding, if you have issues with any electric, like to turn off the power at your circuit breaker. And then, once flooding has gone and once things are dried up, then if you have damage, you call in an electrician or you can turn that back on. Gentleman here has a whole house surge suppressor. Do they need to be concerned at all about turning off any type of electrical power at the circuit breaker, et cetera, if you have a whole house surge suppressor? And I don't know the answer to
I've
that.
never bothered turning off the power to my well.
Mm-hmm.
Lose power, particularly when I
Mm-hmm.
sometimes lose it fairly frequently. I can't work out there with that.
Yeah,
That's the problem.
because Jason, sometimes the contractors here just recommend that because of like power surges. They're concerned about power
Yeah.
surges. And that was the recommended practice. But if you have a whole house surge suppressor, do you know if he's just never done that, had to think about turning it off?
I've never had to deal with any of that. And typically when we're trying to talk to people about the electricity, it's more from a flooding of the, any type of outlets or any type of connectivity so that you don't have anybody to get electrocuted or anything of that nature. I've not had any dealings with the surge protector, but to me, it sounds like that's what it's built or designed to do, is to help in that situation. So.
And it sounds like he hasn't had any issues at all either. So seems like you can keep doing what you're doing. Yeah. We have another question in the chat. So it was about the septic system and what about about maintenance in the septic system and additives. They say, what about vinegar and baking soda? And so using vinegar and baking soda is perfectly fine for cleaning, and I don't think it has any negative effects on your septic system. I haven't heard about putting vinegar and baking soda down into your septic system to increase any type of function. Have you, Jason?
No, but I have heard of people I have heard of baking soda before, because some people, if they're concerned, you mentioned additives earlier, and I agree wholeheartedly with you. And the places where I've gotten on board with people with putting anything in the system, is if you're potentially trying to reintroduce something to kind of gain your bacteria back, the good bacteria to help break down the waste. That's typically where I go in as far as any type of additional additives, other than human waste and toilet paper. So again, I've heard of people talking about putting back baking soda down, or some additives down. And as I say, hey, I'm not telling you what to buy or not to buy, but I don't necessarily think you need it. But if you're in the discussion of trying to get good bacteria reintroduced into your system, more power to you.
Then the other question is, in Walton County, where to get it?
Exactly. Then we had one last question. It had to do with in Walton County, where can you get your water tested? And contact the Walton County Health Department, and they will let you know about testing for bacteria. And then they'll also have recommendations. They might do nitrate and lead, and they'll have recommendation of local certified labs to use. And if you have any questions about that, I can also help you find certified labs in whatever area you are in. First and foremost through your county health department, and then also just depending on where you're calling us from or where you're in the counties over here. There are several certified labs along the panhandle that are recommended for use. Yeah. I think.
It's at the end of the presentation.
Well, I had a little bit, the last thing I just wanted to say about thinking about an emergency water supply, because we are talking about it. I know hurricane season is almost done, or hopefully done, is simply think about 1.5 gallons per person per day to keep that on hand. What we do in our family, each family member has a 5-gallon jug that we fill before a storm comes through. So then you have 5 gallons, and that will last for however long. If you have pets, just think about your pets as well. And then if your well water has been compromised, or if you're on any kind of notice, boiling water, just remember that boiling water is the absolute best way to ensure that you don't have pathogens in there. So minimum rolling boil for 1 minute. If you are unable to boil, there are chemical treatments and filtration systems as well, but there are limitations to that. And what we like to recommend is this great flyer from the CDC, and we will send that out with you, that sort of talks about best methods to use if you're thinking about your water and how to disinfect that. And what I wanted to come up and show you, and I will send these links out to you so that they are live links for more information, since we did get a few questions about that, is we have the number from the Walton County Health Department. Their environmental health division is who you would ask to speak to regarding your septic system permits or anything with septic systems and water testing. Water Management District, I have that info there. We at UF also have 2 websites that offer more information on septic systems, and a very new, recently launched Florida Well Owner Network website that we are still developing, but that is out there as well. Information about where to look for laboratories, and we do have a publication on how to shock chlorinate your well. But what I did want to say with all of this is that we have Jason as a great resource. So Jason, I appreciate that very, very much. And I know you had shared your contact information earlier, and we'll make sure to share that with the information that we send out to people. I have also included Laura's information. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that your number was cut off. That would be the Walton County Extension office, and mine as well. And so any questions that you have, you can just reach out to any one of us, and I will help in any way that I can.
It's really difficult.
Yeah. So with that, actually, I'll stop sharing, and Jason, if you can come back on. And I didn't know if anyone had any additional questions. I don't see any in the chat, but we do very much appreciate your time and attention this evening. And Jason, I wanted to thank you for logging in from Mississippi.
Yeah, thank y'all. Glad to be there, and everyone enjoy your evening. Thank y'all, and again, if I can ever be of assistance, y'all let me know.
We'll be emailing that.
Yes.
Okay.
And so what we will be doing for the people online, and actually the ones in the audience as well, is emailing out all of the resources. And then you'll also get an online evaluation for the presentation. And so we'll send that out, not tonight, but very soon. Yeah.
Okay. See y'all.
Thanks, Jason.
Stop recording.